I'm Marion Turnipseed. I've lived here as a resident at the UP home for going on 13 years now. And during my service career, I flew 35 bombing missions over France and Germany. I flew on D-Day, and so that's what leads up to that. And I had 3 near-death situations also, and I'll cover them as we go. And this is all personal stuff. I kept a diary from the time we left the United States until I was discharged. And so it's just personal stuff, the way I seen it and the way I felt and what I did during the service. So we'll start off with the United States map, and these dots show the travels. There were 16 million people in the service during World War II. The Army Air Corps, the regular Army, the Marines, Navy, and Coast Guard, and other groups that flew or manned supply ships. And Jim Schmidt up here in the Health Center was one of those that was on one of those ships. And Bob Ross up in the Health Center was on the Navy ship in the South Pacific. But I was in Europe all the time. So I'll point out my travels. Washington, Iowa here. 4 of us went to Des Moines and signed the papers and raised our right hand and took the oath to become Air Force soldiers. And from there, I was train trip to St. Petersburg, Florida, and from St. Petersburg to Harlingen, Texas, from Harlingen, Texas to Biloxi, Mississippi, and from Biloxi, Mississippi on the land route back to Washington for a few days, and then to Salt Lake City, Army Air Base, north of Salt Lake City. From there, we went to Tucson, Arizona, and was there for a while, and then we went to Pueblo, Colorado. And from Colorado, we flew then to southeast Kansas for staging, and then we flew a long flight down to West Palm Beach, Florida, and out of the United States. We returned to the United States a year later in New York. I went to Camp Kilmer base down here in New Jersey, and then to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and a 30-day leave home for several days, and then went to the Redistribution Center at Santa Ana, California. From Santa Ana, California, clear back to Rantoul, Illinois, to helicopter mechanic school, and they moved the school to Wichita Falls, Texas, and I spent the summer of 45 here going to school, and then I went back to Jefferson Barracks where I got my discharge, and back to there. The travel was done by rail. Airlines were small compared to what they were prior to the virus situation we're in now, and they were 2 small twin-engine airplanes. A DC-3 was the main one, and they didn't haul too many passengers either. So, but rail was really something. You go into these big railroad stations in the major cities like Chicago, Kansas City, and St. Louis, and New York, and around. It's just, oh, it's like the train, the air terminals are today. The loudspeaker shouting at train arriving here, a certain number, train leaving, this group board this train, and so forth. And so, but the steam engines, they were dirty and jerky, and they weren't as near as smooth as you find the locomotives, diesel locomotives of today. We would, one time, I know on a train, on a trip from, well, I don't know where we were, but here, somewhere in the mountains here, there was a 7-mile tunnel through the mountains. And you can imagine a steam engine going through a 7-mile tunnel with the smoke and stuff coming out of that stack. And when you come out of the tunnel, you want to be sure to have the windows closed, like the signs read, because there was high pressure jet sprays that sprayed the whole troop car down to wash the cinders and smoke off. And so I remember that very well. We enlisted here, of course, and went to St. Petersburg. Well, first we went north of Des Moines to Camp Dodge, and there we shedded our civilian clothes and was issued shoes, socks, underwear, summer uniform, winter uniform, different coats and jackets and head coverings and toothbrush, everything that a person needs to live by on Army standards. So then we were put on a train, a car, I think it was one car, but we were attached to civilian trains. And I think we picked up different cars and attached to different trains. But we went to St. Petersburg, Florida. The Air Force had taken over all the resort hotels, or most of them anyway, in St. Petersburg, and that was our barracks. They took the carpets up, and the one I stayed in was called the Lantern Lane, and it was a little small hotel, 2-story, and I think there was 4 bunks in each room. And of course, the fancy bathrooms that the resort hotels had, it was something for us to keep them clean so we could pass inspections. The basic training here was on a ball diamond. As you know, the major league teams all went south to Arizona and Florida for spring training, and they all had baseball diamonds. So they didn't use them during the war, or they were couldn't because the Air Force took it over. And all of our basic training activities and maneuvers and stuff were conducted in the baseball park. I don't recall what major league diamond that was. But and during the process, a sergeant set us down on a grassy strip and explained to us about becoming an aerial gunner, because of course we didn't know that the loss rate was so high. They was really scratching the surface to get a lot of aerial gunners trained. And so they said, if you sign up to become an aerial gunner after basic training, 5-week school, a gunnery school was, and you'd go from a private to a buck sergeant. That's a 3-striper. So that was really an incentive, and a whole bunch of us signed up for it. Later, during basic training, I got the feeling bad, and I went to sick call in late afternoon, early evening, and a little doctor sprayed stuff in my throat. It was getting sore and put me back on duty. And next day, I was getting worse, so I went to sick call again. The same doctor sprayed my throat, and he put me on porters, so I didn't have to go out and drill. And then the 3rd day, I was really getting sick, and 2 other GIs helped me, and we went to sick call at the infirmary earlier in the day, and I got a different doctor, and he called other doctors over and said, look at this soldier's throat, and they got an ambulance there, and right on the seashore front was had been a real large resort hotel. I remember it had big peaks on each corner of the building, I don't know, about 5 or 6 stories tall, and the Air Force had taken that over as Air Force Hospital, and I was in that hospital. And I was in delirium, I guess, for about a week. A nurse told me after I was starting to recover. And he even thought about even calling my mother down. They didn't know I was going to make it or not. I was in such bad shape. And I had scarlet fever. And that was the 2nd time that I had scarlet fever. I'd had it real bad, and my hands peeled and my feet peeled when I was a youngster going to country school. So you can get it more than once. So by the time I recovered then and got back to our hotel, my squadron had all been processed and shipped out all over the country to different schools and jobs. And so I done some more maneuvers with the basic training group that was there at that time. And then they moved me out of that hotel to another hotel, a smaller hotel, and it was a hotel where a permanent party lived. And there was 2 sergeants in the room I was assigned to, and they worked in the processing department where they shipped people all over the country to different things from basic training. And they asked me if I'd ever signed up for anything. And I said, oh yeah, I'd signed up to become an aerial gunner. And they asked me, well, what, of course, those schools, aerial gunner schools, there's several of them all around. There's even one at Tampa, Florida here. And at that time, Hollywood had made a movie, and the name of the movie was Aerial Gunner. And it was shot at the Harlingen Army Air Base. And I thought, and the world premiere had just been held at a theater there. And it was a movie doing everything that we done when we got there. And I thought, boy, if they did all that there, that must be a first class base. So I said, well, I'd like to go to Harlingen, Texas to school. So 2 days later, I got traveling orders to get on such and such a train. And we left that evening and stopped at Clearwater, which is just north of St. Petersburg. The Air Force hotels were all full in St. Pete, so they had a tent city there in Clearwater, Florida. And we stopped there to pick up a bunch of guys. And you know, the 2 guys that got on the same train car I was on was my second cousin, Bob Bauer, from Westchester, and Carl Adams, who had graduated in my class here at Washington. So us 3 got to go and clear around the Gulf, clear down to Harlingen to gunnery school, and later we went together through here, and then we were separated. I never seen them again. And they ended up doing the same job I did on the Liberator, and they were both shot down and lost. And that affected me quite a bit. And at gunnery school, before you could go to school, they put you in a big iron tube, and it was a decompression chamber. And they would pump that down to equal to 30,000 feet of altitude. And you had oxygen masks on. I think there were 6 or 8 of us at a time in there. Had benches and books and magazines to read, because you had to spend 4 hours in there to see if you could handle the confinement for a period of time and stand the oxygen and so forth. And so we were in there for 4 hours, and during the time we was in there, they asked for a volunteer to take their mask off, and so we could see how lack of oxygen affected. So I volunteered right off. I thought, boy, that could be good training. It might save my life later. And so I took my mask off. They gave me a tablet and a pencil and said, write your name. And it wasn't long, I couldn't even get my name on that tablet. And I was getting giddy. And of course, they had me put my mask back on. So, and then before we started the school, there was a person in personnel that was in promotion of the Air Force, some organization he was with. And he spotted my name of Turnipseed on the roster and decided he could use that in a promotional deal. So outside of the barracks, we raked dirt up and planted a Victor garden. Everybody was supposed to have a Victor garden during World War II. And this is a V here. And my plants that I was planting was 50 caliber bullets, all sticking up here in there. And I had 2 of them in my hand in a V shape. And I machine gun here and a spade here. And I got my helmet and Mae West, which was a flotation device on, and my helmet. And a watering can, I was watering my garden. And he was going to send it to the local newspaper and use that in a promotional Air Force deal. But you know, a day or 2 after I was taken, the guy got transferred out and it died right there. But they did give me a picture of the happening. So then we started the school later, and it was a very highly concentrated school. The actual school was 5 weeks. We were, the whole thing was probably there a couple months. But I'd never shot a shotgun before, even held a shotgun. And at gunnery school, every day, 5 days a week, for about 3.5 weeks of the 5, we were there. you'd go to the skeet range and shoot 25 shotgun shells at the skeet from these skeet houses. And the reason the Air Force did that is so you could learn lead. Like the pheasant gets up and you don't shoot right at the bird. You advance your gun ahead of him so your shell and the target come together out here. So we did that every day. We shot a box of shells. Once I got good enough that I got 23 out of 25 before we quit going out there. But that was a big thing to learn to lead, because you're shooting an enemy plane from a machine gun, your turret or handheld. You don't shoot at the plane. You point at the plane, then you advance from your training the amount where it's climbing or diving or coming across this way or that way. And it was a big part of gunnery school. Once, while we were there, they put us on an AT-6, which is a 600 horsepower low wing plane. It would hold 2 people, one behind the other. And it's the same plane that the cadets used in pilot training in their final stages. And you had to stand up in that back cockpit, had the canopy open, and there was a rail around the cockpit, and you had a machine gun mounted on there. And you had your goggles on and everything, and I think there was four of us AT-6s, 4 gunners, and then another plane towing a big target, like a big sheet. And our bullets, the top of the bullet, the nose, was painted different colors. And my bullets had a green, had been in green paint. So when I'd hit that white target, it would leave a green trace, and they could grade you on what you did. And so that was, and we went out over the Gulf of Mexico here to do this, and then flew back. And then we had another plane, a twin engine plane, that had the same turret as the B-24 top turret was that I used. And we went out over the Gulf, and 250 caliber machine guns. And when you fire 250 calibers right over your head, oh boy, it's quite an experience. And then later, before we graduated, they went out to a little temporary like camp in the sagebrush out here somewhere, and tar paper shacks was our barracks. And there's a 1.5 mile circle track and 11 ski houses around the perimeter of that, with a guy in each one. And 2 gunners would be in the back of this GI truck with an instructor and a guy driving, and he'd drive 30 miles an hour around this 1.5 mile track. And when a guy in this ski house would see the front wheel of the track, he'd fire that clay pigeon. And you was there with your 12 gauge shotgun. Some of them would go this way, and dive down. And one of them, if you didn't hit the target, would land right in the truck. And so that was quite, I don't remember how we were scored on that. That's something that didn't stick in my memory. But that was quite an experience to do that. And before we graduated, they'd blindfold you. And you'd have to field strip that 50 caliber machine gun just to sear the recoil mechanism or something, reassemble it and make it operable. Because if you were flying at night, no lights, and your gun jammed or something, you'd have to be able to disassemble it, field strip it, and repair it and get it back together and function again. And we graduated, we got our silver wings, same wings that all pilots and bombardiers and navigators that everyone gets, only ours had a bullet right in the center of the wing. And like pilots had something else, the bombardiers had a bomb, I think, a navigator, I think there was a sextant on his wings. So, and we graduated, and the ones that were capable and went to Biloxi, Mississippi to B-24 mechanic school. So the summer of '43, we spent in Biloxi, Mississippi at Keesler Field, and all that fall, summer and fall, going to mechanic school. And there we tore down one of these big engines and put it back together. We learned about the landing gear systems, the braking systems, the flap systems, flight control, ailerons, rudder and elevator, and electric systems, hydraulic systems, instruments, the whole plane we studied. And you were graded on each one of them classes. Somewhere I've got thing that shows all them classes we took and the grades you got. And from there, Bob and Carl were still with me, and after we got out of there, we got our first furlough after entering the service. And I think it was a 10-day delay en route to home and then to Salt Lake City. And we separated. I never seen them again, and they were both shot down and killed. Bob flying out of Italy, and Carl was flying out of the 8th Air Force where I was. So it was tough for me. And so I went home for a few days and then took the train out here. And here we were here about, I don't know, a week or two. And I remember I got to go into Salt Lake City once. I remember walking past the big Mormon tabernacle, which wasn't open at that particular time. And you had staging meetings and stuff here. And then we get on a troop train. We were going to Tucson, Arizona to Air Base. And we were handed a mimeograph sheet, and they had made crews. There's 10 men on each plane. And the name of your crew was the last name of your pilot. So our pilot's name was Getz, G-E-T-Z. So we walked around through the troop train, and we found all the names that was on our list. One guy was from a suburb of Boston. One was from Philadelphia. The pilot was from Ohio. Bombardier was from Indianapolis, Indiana. One gunner was from Florida, and one was from close to Joliet, Illinois. And our navigator, was from Ottumwa, Iowa. And then I, of course, was from Washington, Iowa. And the radio operator was from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so we really got acquainted. We lived together, we slept together, we ate together, we flew together, we relied on each other in combat, and we really became close. And I've heard it mentioned that most crews were closer probably than their families back home. And we stayed close, and we had, I think, 7 or 8 reunions all over the country in later years after our families were grown and stuff. But we traveled all over the country with reunions. So Tucson, we was there for a month, a little over a month, and 4 of us. That's the first time I seen a flying B-24 at Davis Monthan Air Base. And the pilot, co-pilot, me, the flight engineer, and the radio operator, we flew then 3 shifts, the morning shift of 5 hours, the afternoon shift, and the evening shift. And every day we'd fly, most days we flew while we were there, us 4. And the reason we did that is to get familiar with each other in their jobs and get familiar with our equipment, our plane and stuff. And one day we took the bombardiers at 10,000 feet out in the desert, and they had a big white circle, white chalked, with a bullseye in the middle. I don't know how big that circle was, whether it was 100 feet or 50 feet or what. And prior to that, they took us engineers into a classroom for a couple hours one day and issued us a movie camera and showed us how to operate it and take care of it. And when we was out here and the bombardier was dropping his bombs, when he had released one of these practice bombs, they're little blue bombs filled with sand, and they would hit the ground, they'd put out a puff of white smoke. And I'd open, there's a hatch door on the bottom behind the waist gunners there where they could bail out. We had plane problems. And I'd lay there with that camera, and then I'd take a picture of that puff of white smoke in relation to the target. And the bombardiers were graded on that. And the other, us 4 flew all the time, and the other guys all attended classes on the ground, all various classes, aircraft wreck, and lots of that, of course. And so aircraft wreck, you go into a big room, and they had a big screen, a white screen on the wall. And they'd turn out all the lights, so it was black, pitch dark in there. And to start with, they would flash 8-digit numbers, in black on that white screen. And it was just an instant, it wasn't even a second, just like that. And you didn't have time to read it, but you had the picture, and you'd write down what you've seen in the picture. After we got familiar with the procedure and doing it, then they switched to silhouettes of all the airplanes, especially the enemy planes, and all of our own Allied planes at different angles of it. It's boom, just flashing. You'd have to write down on your sheet what plane it was, and oh, we had hours and hours. Everywhere we went, we had aircraft wreck, so we could learn to shoot at the right plane and not shoot our own planes. So we were there a month, and then we got shipped by a troop train to Pueblo, Colorado. And here we formed the 491st Bomb Group. That's 4 squadrons, about 17 or 18 crews per squadron. The front squadron, the tail end's Charlie's squadron, and the low squadron, the high squadron. And we'd fly at high altitude. And of course, it was very cold, and way below zero. And we had to wear heated suits. A heated suit was a coverall you put on, and it had electric wire, resistance wires around through it. And you had a cord that you could plug into your thermostat over here, and you could dial the thermostat. You had 2 snaps on a sleeve and 2 snaps on a glove you wore, and you snapped on her, and that was electrical connection, and you had a loop of wire on the back side of each finger. And then on your feet you wore little felt footies that had electric wires in them, and they had snaps to snap to your pant leg and have electrical connection. And they worked good. Overseas it was 30 and 40 below zero when we were flying, and you could always stay comfortable. Or a lot of times the guys would get it too hot and they'd fall asleep during the mission, just riding along when nothing was happening. So that's what we did here at Pueblo. One time they took, I think 6 of us engineers at one time up in one plane and showed us how to transfer fuel. We'd come back through the bomb bay and get up there on top of the wing inside here. Oh, it was probably that tall inside here. And there was a light, you'd turn on the light, and there was a fuel pump in there and a whole bunch of valves. And we learned to be able to transfer this 150 gallons, put half of it in each one of these tanks, and the same way over here. If you lost an engine and it had a lot of gas in its tank, we could arrange the valves to pump that gas out and distribute it among the other engines, because they'd have to work harder if you lost an engine. And voltage regulators, I could see them from my turret. I could see them back here on a bulkhead, big carbon pile voltage regulators. And a lot of times one generator would get too much of the load, and I'd have to get down out of my turret and go over and adjust that. So we learned how to do that. The superchargers here on the bottom of each engine were controlled electronically. Of course, it was big radio tubes. We didn't have resistors in them days. And once in a while, there was a cabinet there on the flight deck with 4 units that electronically control these superchargers. And once in a while, one of them would act up, get to overspeeding or erratic, up and down in speed. And we had one extra one. So I'd have to get down out of the turret and go over, and I could take that one amplifier out and then put that spare in. And I had to do that one time too. And I adjusted the voltage regulators different times too. I remember having to do that. There was a auxiliary fuel pump down here in the front of the bomb bay on the right side. And before takeoff, I'd turn that on, and that pressurized the fuel to the fuel pumps on each engine. In case one of the fuel pumps failed, it would still have enough pressure to keep that engine going. And then after takeoff, I'd have to go down and shut that off. And of course, the electric generator down there, a little 1-cylinder gas engine, we had that running all the time. We were taxiing out. And before we started down the runway, I'd go down and shut that off. And of course, the engine would be revved up then. And I'd restart that after we landed. I'd go down and start that putt-putt and get that charging, because at taxiing speed, these generators didn't charge much. And to keep the batteries good, why, that's what that was for. So we flew all day long, a lot of times there at Colorado. We'd take off in the morning and fly, and then at noon, the group commander would bring all 4 squadrons back down to maybe 12,000 feet, where we could take our mask off for a while and eat some lousy cold sandwiches that the mess hall had fixed for us, and maybe relieve ourselves and get a drink. Then they'd climb back to 17,000, 18,000 feet, and we'd fly all around the 4 squadrons. And he was always hollering at the pilots, close it up, close it up, close it up. I've heard that a million times, because when you get into combat, the Luftwaffe, the German fighters, they'd see, and a lot of groups didn't, they all over the sky, they didn't get it being close, and that's where they attacked, because there's 10 machine guns on that plane, and if you're all in close, that's quite a bunch of bullets coming your way. So they'd leave you alone and go after the easy pickings, except for one time, and I'll get to that later. And so one day we came back there in March or early April, and there was a whole bunch of brand new Liberators sitting on the tarmac, and for 2 days they kept coming in, and so they had brand new planes and each one was signed. That was our plane, just like you get issued a gun, but our crew was issued an airplane, and 10 of all those new planes were painted, and the rest of them were all shiny aluminum, and we got one of the painted jobs. And to paint one of those planes, zinc chromate over the aluminum, and then the paint, you added a little over 200 pounds to that airplane and with that paint. And then the OD paint wasn't as smooth as a smooth aluminum. And some crews tried to wax, that got the old painted plane, tried to wax it to make it smoother going through the air. I don't know whether it helped or not. It had been a big job, that's for sure. So we got to fly that new airplane and everything, and we had artists come, and the officers, I think, had done most of this. This is our emblem they designed, and the pilot done it in French, and we sure didn't like that. Nobody could read it except him, or we knew what it said. Le Semmelot Renegat, what meant fathom renegade. That was the name of on our plane, and this is in the spirit of those we love across the bottom. The cross represents our religion, the bomb is our job, machine gun was our protection, and the jug was our recreation. And we had that painted on the nose, on each side of the nose of the plane, a big round circle of that painted on there. And then we had these printed up on white leather, and they were sewed on our leather flight jackets. All of us had this sewed on our jackets, that also. So after we got familiar with our planes and stuff, we got orders to fly to Harrington, Kansas. One plane at a time, not as a group. And so we take off 30-second intervals and all fly down here. And here we had a staging area to cover a lot of the things about flying outside the United States and going overseas and stuff. I don't recall what all it was. Then we got there a few days, and we had orders to fly to West Palm Beach, Florida. And that was a long, all-day flight because we cruised at 165 mile an hour, Liberator did. So we flew clear down here to West Palm, and we was only there overnight. And the pilots got a big brown envelope with our travel orders. At that time, we had, orders going in the South Pacific, or we were going to Europe. So 1 hour out after takeoff from West Palm Beach, we could open that brown envelope, and we found out that we were going to England. We left West Palm Beach, Florida here, and our first stop was the island of Trinidad, which is off the north coast of South America. So that was an all-day flight from there, clear down to the north coast, clear across the Caribbean, and to Waller Field on this island. And we was only there overnight, and then our order said to fly to Belém, Brazil. And that was a town that's on the south side of the Amazon River. And here's the equator here. This is the equator. So here's the equator right here. So we crossed the equator to get there. And the Amazon River is one big river. 1/5 of all the fresh water that flows into the oceans of the world flows out of the Amazon River. There's some big tributaries. It's bigger than some of the major rivers in other states, because the mountain range is along the west coast of South America, and all this area is fed through that, and the water is brown like it's muddy. And you know the Delta area where it goes into the Atlantic, just like the Mississippi, it's a big wide area with canals and islands and stuff. And this is 200 miles across at the mouth, but it's, like I say, there's islands and canals and waterways, but it's 200 miles. We were there, and back in the States, we were issued a machete. It was a black Bakelite handle about that long, and you'd fold the blade out just like a big pocket knife. And it reminded me of a corn knife that farmers always had years ago. And if we crash landed somewhere in the rainforest and survived the crash, we would need that machete to cut the undergrowth out so we could get out to civilization, I guess. And they took them away from us before we left South America, because we wouldn't need them. We'd like to have one to take home. They were neat. Yeah, we got down here, and it could rain. Oh, can it ever rain in Brazil? And we were there several days, and the Renegade had over 25 hours of air flight time, and there was a 25-hour inspection due. And the engineer had, been issued a sheet and itemized items that you must check and check off to make sure they're okay. And I did that, of course, while we were there. The tables in the mess hall all had a big stack of bananas, and you could eat bananas all you wanted because they were grown around that area, I guess. And then we had orders to fly, I think it was only a 2.5-hour flight to Fortaleza, Brazil. And that's right here on the bump, and that's the shortest way across the ocean. That's why they went this way compared to taking the northern route and cold waters and storms and stuff. So, but this was Fortaleza. I remember Kitch here. I heard her mention Fortaleza. She'd been down to a convention or something at Fortaleza, and I talked to her about it. She said, "Oh yeah, it's a big city." It was when she was there. I don't know how big it was when, but we weren't in town. We were at an air base there. So all we did, the adrenaline was starting to flow, because here we were, 18, 23-year-olds flying that big bomber. We were going to fly across an ocean, and boy, it was something else. So after we were going to take off at 9 o'clock at night from Fortaleza, Brazil, and fly all night to Dakar, Africa, in the state of Senegal, here on the bulge of Africa. And we pre-flighted the engines and re-topped the gas tanks off. And on the way over, of course, I had to transfer fuel from our auxiliary tanks into the main tanks. And I kept track of the RPM of the engines, the mixture settings, and prop settings, and everything, and watched the instruments and fuel consumption to make sure all engines were functioning equally. And we left at 9 o'clock, and at 8 o'clock the next morning we were here. We flew all night across the ocean, and the navigator took us right there. I think we're radio in contact with some Portugal islands out here in the Atlantic, a ways from the country of Portugal here. And we were just there. Well, we had a big surprise when we landed. instead of a concrete runway, is those metal strips like they used in the South Pacific. They had holes in them, they were clipped together, and oh, what a noise it made when you set that bomber down on there and the dust just flew. And we were there just overnight. And then we had orders to fly around Spain to northwestern part of Africa to the country of Morocco. And the city was, the big air base was Marrakech, Morocco. And we were there one day longer we planned on. We got to go into town. I remember an old, we call them camel drivers, going around with a little dust broom like thing and a dustpan sweeping up camel dung. And they dry that, we were told, and used it in their little cook stoves to cook with, I suppose the poor people. And the city was in walled sections, big walled section. You go through archways, and stores and shops was in there. And you go out and go to another one and stuff. But the bombardier, or the navigator, either drank or ate something that didn't agree with him. So he was kind of under the weather. So we stayed a day longer before we took off again in the evening and flew all night again from here. We had to go through, so down here we went through and over some mountains, but here we had to fly out over the ocean around Spain and Portugal and landed in southwestern England. And then we got food to eat and gassed up our plane and give us coordinates to our home base, which was about 80 miles north and a little bit east of London, only about 50 miles in from the North Sea. Shut it off. So we landed in the corner of England here, and our air base was up here. Here's London, and up here on an area close to North Pickenham, a little town of Metfield, England. It's a little town right next to our air base, and this is the North Sea here. So we were about 50 miles in from the North Sea, and all the bomber bases were. There was 3 divisions in the 8th Air Force. 2 of them were B-17s, and the 2nd Air Division was the Liberators that I flew on. And the bomber bases were all over up in here. Fighter bases were down in here in the southern part of England. And then the gals, English gals, had anti-aircraft guns down here to shoot down the German planes and the buzz bombs that came over. They was really good, they said, them gals that manned those guns. And it was 20 miles from Calais where they launched those buzz bombs over to the white beaches of Dover over here. It's only 20 miles, and that's the closest that England is. In our flight, we flew 25 hours, or 35 hours of flight time from the U.S. around the way we went. So we had 35 hours of flight time. Okay, after we got to England, of course, we were very tired because we didn't sleep with the adrenaline flowing like I did on our trip over. We didn't sleep too good. I remember on this trip around Spain, I went back and got in the tail turret, and the moon was such that I could just see that moon glow on the ocean, just to infinity. I can still see that that night because we flew at night, and. So the first 3 days here in England, we just laid around and slept late. We didn't even get the breakfast, I don't think, first 3 days, because we just slept right through until noon. The mess halls were pretty decent. They had a lot of mutton, because sheep farming is a big part of the farms. Most farms had a flock of sheep, and they could do a decent job with sheep. We called it woolly beef. Is what we referred to that as. And then we got to fly in practice missions around over England. The whole group, all 4 squadrons, would fly and close it up, close it up, close it up, and get in there close and stay that way. And it was prop works from all them engines ahead of you. Instead of nice smooth air, it was torn up, the air was. And your plane would rock, and the pilot was always fighting. I've seen gets at 30 and 40 below zero, sweat coming where it was visible from what we wore. And even working so hard, because it's all manual to control that airplane with cables. And but we flew, and on June the 2nd, we were having a practice mission, and they stopped us before we got the engine started and said, report back to the briefing room. The briefing room was a huge Nissen hut type building, because you had to hold all 4 squadrons of people, 10 people to a plane. And then there's a big stage at one end and a huge map of Europe on one end of it. And so we dropped everything and took the GI truck back to the briefing room, and the group commander made a talk to us about what was taking place. And then there was a big curtains that were drawn over this big map, and a briefing officer then got up on the stage and had them curtains drawn back, and there's a red cord from where our base was, to the target, and you didn't go, that cord didn't go straight to the target. It went this way and this way and maybe this way and this way, because from previous missions they knew where the anti-aircraft were heavily concentrated. So that's what we were doing. We were dodging that area. Our first mission was an airfield south of Paris, and south of Paris. It ain't on here, I guess. But in an airfield, we carried our biggest bomb, a 2,000 pounder, and there's 4 bomb bays in our plane, and there's room for four of them big planes, or big bombs. And the reason we carry them big ones is because we want to hit them runways and do as much damage to them as we could, so that it'd take them a long time to repair and get that airfield functional. And it was south of Paris, and the Germans, it's a big airfield just south of Paris, and the Germans are using that as for their Luftwaffe aircraft. So after we found out where we were going, everything went to the plane and took off, and you had a designated area. We take off at 30-second intervals, and we were supposed to climb, circle and climb till we get to the altitude, maybe at a little over 4 miles or something. We had individual planes would all come together for 4 different squadrons placed where they were supposed to. So it was a big deal, big operation, and they had trouble finding we had an old war rotary B-24 stripped down that would go up, and it would shoot flares out, and we would look for that and form on it, and then it would return to our base after we got formed. But all the bases had trouble with that. So to correct that, they painted the planes, and this is our old B-24. It don't even have a nose turret, and it was all, things were stripped out of it. And they'd take that up and fly and shoot flares out, and there's a book out that shows a lot of these old formation planes and how different groups painted them. But this is the way our 491st group painted the old plane yellow with the big red polka dots all over. And you could spot that for quite a distance away. And they would shoot certain color flares out too at the same time. So after that we got formed and went and zigzagged it down to our target south of Paris, and dropped our bombs, and the head navigator led the whole group, the big group, and of course then there's a whole bunch of groups. As far as you can see, there's planes flying, bombers, and he got too close. We were supposed to miss Paris, and he got too close to Paris, and all at once we had a lot of flak. And we were flying here, and the plane in our squadron, he was up here, and a shell hit one of his left engine and blew it right off of the wing. It just dropped away, and the 2 engines on his side were so full power, and here it comes, and I'm right on top here, and boy, it was a scary moment. Here I am right here, my head's right here between 2 50 caliber machine guns, and here comes this other plane coming right at us, and the co-pilot, they had windows above their head as well as inside. And he just, thank God he was looking up there too, and he seen, and he lunged on the controls, ripped them out of the pilot's hand and shot the Renegade down, and that other plane just slipped across the top of us. If John hadn't seen that, the two planes would have crashed together over 4 miles high, and that would have been the end of everything. So, and we got back, we had 5 holes in the airplane from flak. You know, flak is anti-aircraft shells exploding. And all these black puffs you see on here are a big 88 millimeter German anti-aircraft shells bursting. And each one of them is spraying out chunks of iron at a high velocity that will tear up airplanes and human bodies. And that was our biggest worry, that flak, because the Luftwaffe, they had lost so many planes, and their pilots were younger men and didn't have a lot of training, and so they weren't much of a, I only seen enemy planes once, and that was one coming the other way, flew right through our squadron, and he was probably coming out of the dive from attacking another group, and he was probably going over 300 mile an hour, and we were cruising at 165, so it was, and I could see the big black swastika on the side of the ME-109, Messerschmitt 109 was the plane, and that's the only time I seen an enemy plane. So it was after dark and we got back that night, but we tried to find the base and landed. And that was June the 2nd, 1944. And we had another mission or two after that. And then June the 6th, 1944 was D-Day. And the invasion of France over here off of Cherbourg. And the American forces, Canadian forces, English forces, Australian forces, and some lesser countries. At 8 o'clock, we were above Cherbourg Peninsula on June the 6th, 44. And it was very cloudy. The weather had changed, and it was very cloudy. We call it undercast because we were above the clouds. And we had a very specific target where there was a concentration of German troops, and we was to drop, smoke bombs was going to be fired, and we'd fall and hit that target. But the clouds were so thick we couldn't see, and they wouldn't let us drop our bombs. And oh, we sure hated that we couldn't drop our bombs. And we didn't get to drop our bombs and had to take them back and bring them home because we couldn't. And later that day we flew another mission and did bomb somewhere down in here. I forget just where it was. Okay, on D-Day, June the 6th, I think we got up at 1 o'clock or something in the morning. They routed us out to go to breakfast and then to briefing. And we were over the Normandy at 8 o'clock that morning. And at 11 o'clock that night, June the 6th, 1944, here's what I wrote in my diary. I have trouble reading this, and I went to Andrew, our chaplain here, and thought maybe I should take that out of my program because it really bothers me even 75 years later to read that. And he said, no, that's the way it was. I said, that's the way you felt that day. So I'll read this to you, but it tears me up. I just came back to the hut. I left this morning at 1:30 a.m. and it is now 11 p.m. We didn't get to bed till late last night either. We took tablets today to keep us going without sleep. We were over the French coast at 8 a.m., but we didn't get to drop our bombs. We got credit for the mission because we seen plenty of flak. There was a complete undercast. The invasion started this morning and things are really popping. I guess we are doing plenty of good. we don't worry about things, we don't, we don't worry about our 30 missions anymore. We just hope we can keep flying, and the weather will let us keep flying till we end this thing. We really hated it that we couldn't drop our bombs this morning to help soften the beachheads for the poor devils crossing the channel from England. And to soften the beachheads for the poor fellows coming across the channel. I just heard the national anthem a little while ago, and it sounded different tonight. I could hardly feel it. I could really feel it as I had never felt it before. I will be getting up in a few short hours. So that's what I wrote. And after all that, and taking those pills and then wearing off, it was quite a moment. And like I said, that's why it still bothers me today to read that. Okay, so we continued to fly, and after my 6th mission, I had gotten a slight head cold, and I had a right ear after a mission. After a 6th mission, and it didn't clear good. I'd scream and holler and do everything that we do to clear your ears from altitude to ground level, and it got the bottom of me, so I went down to the hospital, and they sprayed stuff in my ear and in the back of my throat to try and open the stake-in tube that balances the air pressure in your inner ear. And it sent me back to my hut, but it got to be worse. I just couldn't stand it any longer. So I went back down to the base hospital, and they put me in a hospital. And that night my eardrum ruptured and drained, and oh boy, did I fall asleep from all the fatigue I had. And I was in the hospital for 4 days, and then I was grounded for 4 weeks. And while I was grounded, my crew flew 9 missions, and so when I got out of the hospital to fly with them again, I was 9 missions behind my crew. And boy, that really bothered me, because when they were finished, here I'd be stuck over there with strange people, and because you didn't get acquainted with people, because they probably get shot down, and if you were friends of yours, it'd bother you. So they found, in late July, our bombs were, of course, came by ship across the ocean, and then loaded on trains, and the train took them to the train station at the little town there next to our base. And then our armament people in GI trucks would load those bombs on the trucks and bring them back to the air bases and unload them in our bomb dump, which was a big area with dirt burn all around it. So if they did blow up, it would go up more than go out. And it was on a Friday evening, and 2 of the armament guys had already had a pass to town, so they were a little short-handed. Usually they use a hoist to take the bombs off the truck and put them on in the bomb dump. But they were short-handed, so they just rolled them off. Of course, they're supposed to be safe like that, but one of them did blow up. We heard a big explosion, and we jumped on our bicycles and went down to the flight line, and the biggest explosion came while we were there. And the big sliding doors on them big hangars blew them right off. The concussion did. A piece of hot metal fell pretty close to us, and it damaged our plane. The Renegade was on the other side of the field in our parking area, but the ones on that side, we lost 13 airplanes that were. The skin was wrinkled, and the concussion hit them rudders and twisted the fuselages, so they had to use them for to junk them out for parts to fix the planes that were still flying. So then my crew finished their missions early in August, 2nd or 3rd, something like that. And they finished their 30 missions in 68 days of flying. They flew that often. And here I was left with 9 missions to go. And they all left to be shipped home. And my pilot, he wasn't ready to go home, so he went to he was the type of guy that can promote things and really get into things. He went to a P-51 base and got checked out on P-51s, and he'd done weather reconnaissance flying. He'd fly over Germany and call back weather conditions on primary and secondary targets. And he flew 50 missions in a P-51 and after 30 in a bomber. And I and him is the only two left out of the crew. He lives in a home like this in north of Sacramento at Fairfield, California. And it's a home for retired military officers. It's really a first-class place. And he got his doctorate later in school and stuff afterwards. And he's written 7 books, I think. Bill has, yeah. And we talk every so often, all the time. And then they were all gone, and I was left there, and you couldn't have a fire in our little pot-bellied stove in our hut. There was 2 crews to a hut. The enlisted men in this hut, and another hut was one of the officers for those 2 crews. And you could have a fire from 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night. But during the day, it was cold and damp, and I'd sit there across my little bed, and I knew 21 types of solitaire I could play. And I'd go to the mess hall and come back and had my heavy clothes on because it was cold and damp. And I think I flew 4 missions all fall, or a crew would come up, needed a flight engineer. But you know, in the middle of September, a crew was flying the Renegade, our old plane, up here in northeastern Germany, and he got shot down. And oh boy, something else to work on my brain. And here I had all these missions to go, and then they increased from 30 missions, you had to fly 35. And oh boy, I didn't think I'd ever make it. And my first near-death situation was there south of Paris, our first mission. And you know, that changed. You think, boy, we'll never make 30 missions, you know, without being shot down or killed or something. And so I flew 4 missions, and just now and then all fall. And we lost the Renegade went down, and that had really a mental effect on me too. And in November, I wasn't flying, our group went, and the Luftwaffe decided that they had never attacked those green tails. Each group had different configurations on their tail. B. Baker, that B stood for B. Baker on the radio call letters. And so they concentrated what power they had on the green tails on a mission that day. And we lost 16 planes, our group did. They weren't all shot down, a lot of them were, but a lot of them shot up so bad they couldn't make it back to the base. So they had to land I don't know where the lines, our army lines were, but they had to land over in France rather than try to make it across the channel into England. And the rest of them continued their mission and successfully bombed the target, even after that terrible happening. And our group had a presidential citation for that deal. In December, first I'll tell you what happened. On the 26th of December, my oldest sister died here in Washington in the hospital. She was 26. And I didn't get the cablegram until January the 2nd. The Battle of the Bulge was on, and personal cablegrams had very low priority, of course. So it was January the 2nd before I found out, and the cablegram said, "Your sister died." Didn't say, and I had 4 sisters. And oh gosh. Earlier cablegram I'd never received due to the Battle of Bulge and conglomeration of traffic, radio traffic, and so it was some time before I found out that it was my oldest sister who had ruptured appendix and peritonitis, and she died. She was 26 years old, and died here. And so then I got assigned to permanently to a crew, Lieutenant Baker's crew. They didn't, I don't know what happened to their engineer or what, but I was assigned to that crew. Pretty good crew, but they had a lot of missions to go yet. And I had, I don't know, at that time, I probably had about 8 or 9 to go. And we flew with them. The radio operator, he got sick every mission. He'd throw his breakfast up. A lot of people got sick in the States, they were sick. But when they got overseas, they had something else on their mind, and the air sickness went away. Pudgy, the radio operator, every mission he'd toss his breakfast. But we were on one mission, and coming back from somewhere from a mission, there's a swivel. My bottom of my turret seat was about 30 inches off the flight deck. They were behind the pilot and co-pilot. And there's a swivel on the floor and a BX cable, which is a flexible metal cable, that the current for my heated suit and my line for my oxygen supply is in that cable. And that swivel quit swiveling, either froze up from moisture or lubrication lack or what. But anyway, it threw a hackle in my lines and shut off my oxygen. And when you breathe out, you had an exit port on that rubber mask down here, and your breath would freeze. And it was common to reach up and squeeze that rubber mask and crack that ice off. And everybody had to do that every so often at that 30 and 40 below zero. And I remember doing that, and looking over at my little gauge over here on my oxygen radio, and it was reading 0. And that's the last I remembered. And I passed out, of course. And sometime later, I didn't answer my intercom, and they got to checking. I was slumped down, and they pulled the cable and released the seat and dropped me down and got oxygen to me and brought me around. And they thought it was at least 15 minutes. I was probably passed out. And evidently, that night I had a kind of a headache, but evidently no permanent damage, because here I am at 97 years old, so there was no permanent damage, I guess. So that was my second close. I was on the way out. If they hadn't found me when they did, or I'd have had brain damage or something. So that was my second close call. And then my last 4 missions were to Magdeburg, Germany. It's Berlin was here's Berlin. It was south and west of Berlin a ways, and there's a big supply depot there. The fuel, they thought maybe there's even some refinery going on, but all kinds of supplies for the armies, their armies. And the second time we went there, on the way back, the navigators got too close to Hanover, Germany. Hanover's here somewhere. But anyway, and all at once, well, I can't see Hanover. But anyway, it's there somewhere. And all at once, boom, 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 like that picture I showed you all in the flak. And right in our squadron. And the pilot's windows above him and on the side and the windshield were bulletproof. They were about that thick. And it was shattered, but it didn't fall out. It's still there. And this piece of flak here, it's a piece of a German 88 anti-aircraft shell, had my name on it, and it hit my dome from right around my head on the top turret. And so that was my third near-death situation. And that dome, it didn't have plastic, it was plexiglass, they called it, and it just shattered. It went at 30 and 40 below zero, and everything loose. The radio operator right beside me here, all his papers and code papers. There was a big suction, and the pilot had some papers laying there. Anything loose on the flight deck shot up past me, and I reached down and dropped my cable. I thought the plane was blowing up. and I got down on the deck to get my parachute, and everything was all right down there. But and then the other planes were calling our plane and said, yeah, wondered if I was hurt because the top of the turret was gone, and but it didn't hit me, but it came that close. So that was my third near-death situation that I had, and don't think that didn't bother you. I had 2 missions to go yet, and the last 4 missions were to Magdeburg, and each day it seemed like they had a lot of anti-aircraft guns on flatbed railroad cars, and they'd move them around where they thought they'd do the most good, and it got worse each day. And finally, on February the 15th, 1945, I flew my last mission. And oh boy, when we got back, of course I was the only one that finished that day. The rest of them were all newer crews. And they all gave me their double shot of whiskey that we always got after a mission, after we debriefed. We take our canteen cup over here to the GI and put 2 ounces of whiskey in there. And you hadn't eaten for 10 or 12 hours. And the government did that to keep you mentally away from the war. And of course that day, a lot of guys gave me 2 double shots, and I got pie-eyed. And they said I went down to the flight line, and the flight officer in his office, I beat on his desk and said, I'm a ground pounder, I'm never flying again. And I went on and on. Of course he knew the deal. And so I finally finished my tour of duty. Our medals that you receive, I got them mounted here on the board. If you finished your full tour of missions, you got the Distinguished Flying Cross. And that's a very highly rated medal. The Air Medal, every 6 missions you flew and survived, you got the Air Medal. The first time you got the medal, and then after that you got oak leaf clusters that you added to your ribbon. And so I had 5 Air Medals in flying 35 missions. And the others are all Good Conduct Medal and African European Medal and these others that Dave Loebsack, the congressman from this area, came here to the home and presented me with medals that I don't think there's even available when I got discharged, because I got discharged 6 days after the Japanese signed their surrender on the battleship there in Tokyo Bay. So that's the medals I received. Now recently, my pilot had received a Medal of Honor from the French government. About 3 years ago, he received it. And he turned my name in and all about me and what I had done on D-Day and St. Lo and Calais and different places in France where we flew. And he turned my name in and all about me and the person I am and so forth. And these medals is the highest medal that the French government gives. And it's the same as the Congressional Medal of Honor that the president hangs around on a blue ribbon here in this country. And so this medal here, Napoleon Bonaparte helped design and approve this medal in 1802. And so it's a big deal. And the French consulate office in Chicago for central part of the country, I can go there and have this pinned on me with the ceremony, or if I can't travel, they could come here. Well, that's what we were planning on for Veterans Day in the last of May, in the big program we have at the Washington High School. Governor Reynolds was here last year and made a speech, and we was going to have him come because they said a French official has to pin that on you. No exception, the letter said. So that is quite an honor to get that big heavy medal. Last mission, in a couple of weeks I got traveling orders to go to southern England to seaports down here. And there were 400 of us Air Force returnees to go back to the States. And we were passengers on a hospital ship that had room for us. The ship's name was the Uruguay, and it had been a civilian passenger ship prior to the war. And so 400 of us were passengers on that boat. And the guys from Missouri and Iowa, I think about 16 or 17 of us, the 400, and we were on what they called milk duty. The freezer was in the bottom of this big ship. And over in England, we always had powdered milk and powdered eggs. We didn't have fresh stuff. The days we flew a mission, they'd give us fresh fried eggs. And that kind of bothered us too. It's like our last meal. And if you didn't fly, you had powdered eggs like everybody else. But on the days we flew, we had nice fried fresh eggs. But so we went down south there and got on a boat, 400 of us, and it was on milk detail. And we'd go down to the bottom of the ship to the freezer and take out what the mess hall required and stack it, and what we'd stacked the day before and thaw it out, we'd load on carts and take it up to the mess hall. And then we were done for the day. We could do whatever we wanted to. And the next day we'd repeat that. And us guys from Missouri and Iowa, we really guzzled that fresh milk. We lived on it. And we had 2 meals a day on the boat. And the tables were anchored to the floor with a pipe frame, and they wouldn't move. And you had 2 meals a day, and you had pickles every meal, some type of pickles, and that was to help retard seasickness. And I guess it helped, but a lot of guys were so sick in that rough water in the North Atlantic here, and a windstorm we got into, that they wished they could die. I think they were so miserable. So the first 3 nights out of London, we had a lot of explosions at night. And what it was, this convoy was big, I don't know, maybe several hundred ships, I don't know. And the Navy destroyers or sub-chasers or what would keep circling around because the German submarines were still active. And the first 3 nights out, during the night, you hear explosions where the Navy had launched these depth charges trying to blast a submarine that was trying to sneak into the convoy. And after 3 nights, we never heard any more. That was the end of it. And we spent 12 days on the boat going across to New York. In the North Atlantic out here, we had a big windstorm, and then big cargo vessels, big long things. The back end would be way up in the air, and your prop would be way up here in the air, turn around the propeller. And then pretty soon it'd be down, the front end would be way up. And then our bunks were just a pipe frame with a laced canvas on it. That was your bunk. And at night, it'd slide you this way and that way a little bit. And then close the watertight doors on all the compartments. And the vomit, oh, I don't know how I kept from getting sick, but I didn't. And so that's the way we traveled back to New York. After we got into New York, and had another thing that was neat, we sailed right past the Statue of Liberty with our arm up, and that was a good feeling. And they finally docked that big boat at one of the docks at New York, and then got on a train and took us down to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, where we got haircuts and replaced some clothing we didn't have anymore. And then we had travel orders to go to St. Louis to Jefferson Barracks, where we got a 30-day furlough. And, you know, at one time they thought we'd all be speaking German. The red is what Hitler, there was 21 countries that the Germans had taken, including the big one of France, and trying to get into Germany and Northern Africa, where these lines are. And there's 21 countries, I won't read them all, but that they had conquered all the, and the ones in yellow are the ones that declared neutral countries. Wales, Sweden, Turkey, and Spain, and Portugal, and Switzerland here. And they were declared neutral. They wouldn't help the Allies or the Germans, either one. So they were really going at it. You know, in '42, with the Blitz of England, they left off and bombed the heck out of the southern England, London and other major cities. And the Blitz of '42. And England was really down. We weren't even in the war yet. And they was going to think, we always thought if they had taken England, if Germans had taken England instead of concentrating on Germany or Russia at that time, we wouldn't have had any seaports. Look how that would have changed the war. Where would our ships, supply ships, went? Because England at that time, and all these islands, this was all German red at that time, and so it would have changed the war, and we might have ended up speaking German or Japanese. So that was one thing that I didn't cover at that time. But 21 countries were under German control. My grandfather Bauer and my uncles were all around the Westchester area farmers. They came from down in this part of Germany back after the Civil War. And that's where they came from. Two uncles and an aunt and my grandfather all came from this area and came across after the Civil War. They came over because Grandma Turnip, and then my grandmother Turnipseed, she was born in 1859. That's 3 years before the Civil War. And I at our wedding in August of '49, I remember taking 2 pieces of wedding cake down to her and my aunt who lived with her and to help take care of her. And but she was born before the Civil War. You know, when I think of that, that bugs me to think that I knew my grandmother was quite pre-Civil War. Okay, when we got back to the States, there in New York Harbor, and went down to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and got taken care of. And then traveling orders to Jefferson Barracks, and where we got a 30-day delay en route. And while we were there 3 or 4 days, we got traveling orders and stuff. And we'd go through the mess hall with our tray with the different compartments. The guy on the other side would ladle and, you know, take his beans and so forth. They were German prisoner of wars. And it just come from fighting them over in Germany. And here they are feeding me. That was kind of a shock, but they were just young guys like we were, and they really had it made. Here they were, away from the war. They had good food, good living quarters, medical attention. So they really had it made to be away from the war. And there was prison camps. I don't know how many, there were several in Iowa, I guess, prison camps. I don't know whether they're Japanese or German or what. But, so went here and got a 30-day delay en route. And so I spent about 3 weeks probably at Washington, then took a train trip to Santa Ana, California. This is a redistribution center and a big base. And one thing I remember is the salad bar. I'll bet it was 15, 20 feet long. And of course, in England, we didn't have any salads and vegetables like that. And oh boy, did we ever live on that, on the salad bar. And you know, one day I was in the mess hall eating, and a young guy come up to me, and on the way over on the boat, I forgot to tell you, we was playing poker. We had GI blankets over cases, and a whole bunch of places on that one deck. And I'd won some money playing poker. And this young guy came up, and he'd lost all his money, and here he's going home on 30-day leave. And he was a nice, clean-cut young kid. And he wanted if I'd loan him money. He'd take my address and everything and send it to me. And he wanted $10. Of course, that was equal to what, $70 or $80 today, probably, or more. And so I did. I loaned him $10. I thought I'd never see it again. And you know, I was at a mess hall there at Santa Ana, and here he walked up and gave me $10. And it sure changed my faith in human beings. I did that. But while we were there, we could just do everything. You know, one day we took a bus trip to Hollywood and passed all them, the stars' homes, even got off the bus at Mary Pickford. You probably don't remember her, your younger people, but she was noted for big flower gardens. I think we even got off the bus and walked through them. But, and the stage door canteen where the stars would come and dance with the soldiers and visit with them. The afternoon I was there, it was pretty quiet. There wasn't anything like that going on. But I had friends at Long Beach, California, and during the war you could just stick your thumb up out there and bang, you had a ride right now. And so I hitchhiked Long Beach, I think maybe 3 times while I was there, from people back here that I knew, and spent weekends with them. Then one day there, they handed us a mimeograph sheet and listed all the things that you could do if you were qualified to go to. And so one place was a helicopter mechanic school at Rantoul, Illinois. That's close to Champaign, where the college is. And I thought, boy, on a weekend I could hitchhike home from Washington here. And so I signed up to go to the helicopter mechanic school, and I could go into Chicago on weekends. And so I was there about 2 weeks. I hadn't started school yet, and they was going to move the school. The pilots flew the flying planes, because they had pilot training too, and mechanic training. Everything loaded up on train and went to Wichita Falls, Texas. So I spent the summer of '45 at Wichita Falls, Texas, going to helicopter mechanic school. We had a furlough once that summer and got to go home for, I don't know, 10 days or something probably. And I bought a car, a 37 DeSoto with overdrive. And you know, speed limits all over the country was 35 miles an hour, anywhere you went. And that was to save rubber tires and gasoline as ration. But I had an address of a friend that was stationed where I was, that lived over in Illinois from Davenport. And I called him and he rode with me. We drove that over DeSoto all the way back to Wichita Falls, Texas. And that was quite an experience. And I'd read about battle fatigue. A lot of guys in the lines, they just lost it mentally and had to be taken care of. And then there's another group that several months later would start having bad dreams and stuff. And you know, that summer down here at Wichita Falls, I started having dreams. I was out in the Bombay, the Renegade, and for some reason, of course, the Bombay weren't open when I was back there pulling pins on the bombs. But this time, in my dream, the doors were open, and I always worried about if I'd fall off on one of these they're like a roll-top desk, those doors roll down. I wondered if they would support a human being, and that always worried me. But here in my dream, the doors were open, and I stepped off, and I was started to fall, and I'd wake up. I'd be breathing heavy, and I'd be a little sweaty. And that continued on for a while, and I thought, well, I'm going to have to go down to the medics and see a psychiatrist or something and get some help, because this is worrying me. But you know, every night we was going down to the NCO club, that's a non-commissioned officers club, guzzling beer that was bottled, I think, the day before, gallon stuff, and it wasn't very good stuff. But we was drinking that, guzzling that about every night. And you know, I got over it on my own. So home remedies do work sometimes. And so then about the time I graduated from the helicopter school, the point system came out, and I had more than enough points to get discharged if I so desired. You weren't forced out. You could stay in if you wanted to, but I wanted to get out. I didn't want to stay in the service. So I had traveling orders for me in my car back to St. Louis again. And 3 of the tires on the old DeSoto weren't very good. One was a good tire, and I drove the heck out of it. I never did get stopped for speeding, but I blew 3 them 3 bad tires before I got to St. Louis. And I'd just go to the next town, show them my government travel orders, and even though they were ration, they'd sell me a new tire. So by the time I got to St. Louis, I had 3 new tires, and the one that was already on there was a good one. And of course here we got was there a few days and got all the money situations straightened out and got our discharge, and I go back to Horston. And that ended my career in the service. I would have gotten a discharge and got home, but I'll go back and fill out some things that happened to me while we were gone. We dropped bombs several times that were delayed action bombs, up to 72 hours. Hundreds of airplanes all dropping bombs, and some of them would go off when they hit the ground, and others would go off sometime later, up to 3 days. Why, and that would delay them getting in with work crews to big marshalling yards, acres and acres of railroad tracks that switch it around, and we'd drop in there and try to stop them from repairing them for at least 3 days. Them bombs would be popping off. The size bombs we carried was 250s, 500, 1,000-pounder, and then the big 2,000-pounder. Here, not too long ago, I seen a little caption in the newspaper where a construction crew in Germany was digging on a building or something and dug up a bomb that had a dud that hadn't exploded. And then we had stuff we carried on a plane called chaff, C-H-A-F-F. And chaff is aluminum foil strips, or tin foil strips, about that long and about a 1/4 inch wide. And it was in a little cardboard package with one side not could fly open, and maybe 100 or so in there. And there was a little chute on the back of the waist on the plane. And on cloudy days, they couldn't see us. They were shooting at us with their radar, was what they were aiming with. And so all them planes were shoving them package of chaff out, and just a layer of tinfoil floating. And pretty soon, instead of the shells busting around us, they'd be busting way down and behind us, because all they were shooting at was the chaff. And on the military channel, on a jet plane, they had a chaff. So it's something that could use occasionally, even today maybe. So that was one thing that we did. And I always thought some of those targets, where a lot of planes we went to several times, the ground must be covered like snow with all tinfoil strips. Then to show you what kind of a pilot we had, here we just Renegade. You can see the emblem painted here on the nose, and it's just coming in for a landing. Look at them wheels; both of them are just perfect, inches off the runway. That's the kind of pilot he was. He was just perfect. Yeah. So. Just a minute. 19. I was going to show you what we look like. Here's what we look like when we were dressed for a mission. We had a regular uniform, shirt and pants on under this, and he put on a pants. It was leather with sheepskin lining and 2 suspenders held on. Then the jacket is the same way, leather with the sheepskin lining. Boots were leather with rubber soles on them and up a little ways, and with leather with sheepskin lining. Our helmet was leather with sheepskin lining on there. And you put the suit on, and over your heated suit and stuff. Then you put on your May West, they call it. It was a life vest, and it had 2 little cords hanging out here, and you'd yank on that, and it'd inflate a CO2 cylinder, and there was 2 of them. It was in 2 halves, and they would inflate out if you landed in the water. Then over the top of that, you wore your parachute harness, not the chute itself, because there just wasn't room in nobody in the plane wore this. So you had to get out of your turret or wherever you were and pick this up. And there was two big D rings on your chest. And there's two big snaps on you can't see it, they're on the other side of this my parachute pack. And you pick it up and snap that on, and then the handle, which you probably can't see it, but the handle for the ripcord is right there for your right hand. And so that's what we wore. And then, before we got to enemy territory, navigator or pilot, somebody say it's time to put on our flak suit. So we had a flak suit that went on a vest, and it covered from side to side. The back of your turret was metal, and you would stop most flak shots, that shrapnel. But there's little metal plates lapping over in that, and that thing weighed 22 pounds. And down at your waist, it had a hinge where a part of it lay out on your lap to protect your genitals and stuff. And then you put that flak suit on, that was 22 pounds. So boy, you were really weighted down, and you're sitting in your turret and sat there for 10, 12 hours. Couldn't move around hardly, it just jammed in there. At one of the 8th Air Force reunions, they had a little tail turret there off of the V-24, and you couldn't even get in it. It was so tight. But that's the way we looked at as you had your microphones on the earphones on, and the microphone was on your throat down here. Yeah. While we were in England, we had 2 passes to London. The first time we tried to get a room at the Piccadilly Hotel, which was a real popular place, and a lot of GIs there, a lot of women in that area. That was pretty close to the Queen's Palace too. So we tried to get a room there, and they were full up, and they had an annex right there too, and it was full. So I and Charlie, the waist gunner, we always piled around together. We went to another hotel a couple, 3 blocks away, the Winston, I believe it was, a smaller hotel, and got a room. And we were later eating in a restaurant, eating deer steaks. I think they were illegal, but nobody did anything about it because meat was rationed so severely. And a big explosion came, and then one of these buzz bombs come flying in and come down and hit the annex to the Piccadilly Hotel. And we often wondered if we got a room there, if we'd have been there or not at the time that hit. So that was something else to think about. And that was on the first pass to London. And then on the second pass to London, we had, I think it was 3 or 4 days. And you know, the government would give enlisted men a bottle of whiskey when they go and pass the London. Officers got a bottle, and enlisted men got a bottle to help us get through this ordeal. And the second time we talked to an old taxi driver, and those old taxis, they had a burner underneath because fuel was so scarce. That burnt charcoal purpose, like you put in your charcoal grill. And it gives off a gas, and that engine was modified, would burn it, and they'd chug around, they stunk, but they got the job done. And he took us all around. We seen Big Ben, Scotland Yard, London Bridge, Waterloo Bridge, all the government buildings, and drove down Puddin Lane, London Tower, the fort where William Penn was Christian. You know, but anyway, we seen where the war roses were fought, and that night, when Charlie went to a movie and saw a pinup girl on that pass to London. So it was a nice trip that time. Well, another thing we did in the latter part of my tour duty, we dropped a bunch of pamphlets. One side is German, the other side is French. and it's from Dwight Eisenhower. And I had that translated. I think Ruth Zur did one for me, and then a gal down in where we came from, in our Oklahoma on the lake down there, did one. And so I don't know how accurate it is, but it's just Germans. Below you will find a great number of people in prison work battalions and concentration camps. Germans obey no commands from any source or circumstance to perpetrate mistreatment or oppress these people, whatever nationality or religion they belong to. The Allied armies who have landed on German soil expect in their advance to find these people living and uninjured. Everyone will meet severe penalties who directly or indirectly, in great or small degree, is guilty of their mistreatment. Everyone having a percent command position is expected to observe this warning. Dwight D. Eisenhower, General Supreme Commander of the Allied Military Forces. And we dropped those by the thousands. I had this sealed in plastic to preserve it. So that concludes my tour of duty, and I hope it's good entertainment for you and something I'll never forget, and I wouldn't do it again for $1 million. Thank you. In the service.